Welcome to Investors Coffee Shop. We're your host, Brian Harte.
Adam Eltarhoni.
I have been working in the financial industry for over 18 years. I started in New York City and in 2010 expanded my business to Alexandria, Virginia.
For over 25 years, I've been gaming and investing in collectibles. I grew up in Georgia and in 2017 moved to Washington, D.C.
Investors Coffee Shop is for people who want to learn more about investing, make better decisions, create new streams of income.
In each episode, we will discuss investing in art, wine, collectibles, stocks, bonds, real estate, and anything else that may generate a profit.
Join us at Investors Coffee Shop. Welcome back to Investors Coffee Shop. Today we'll be discussing investing in a franchise business model. But first, Adam, welcome back. Has anything exciting happened since the last time we spoke?
Nothing too exciting. I went down to Miami for a birthday weekend, which was nice to kind of get away from the city and, enjoy the beach.
And while growing up, Adam, did you ever work for a company that was a franchise like McDonald's or Hardee's?
Yes, I worked at a Papa John's in my area.
Did you ever have the desire to own that Papa John's?
No, well, at one point, of course, you hear about the franchisee and you're like, oh, I'd like to, as a high schooler, work at or own my own kind of pizza place or restaurant. But now, looking back, I do not want to own a Papa John's.
When I was younger, I worked at Hardee's. I was about 16 years old, which is owned by CKE Restaurants, which also owns Carl's Jr. So they're well known in the franchise world. If you could choose any company, whether they are a franchise or not, it could be a private company. Which company would you like to own as a franchise, Adam?
I thought about this, and I think it was for fun. There's a chain of theaters called Landmark Theaters. I'm a big movie person, so I would like to, they have a bar in the front and everything like that. That would be my fun franchise to own. And then for maybe like financially, I think an IKEA would be a fun business to franchise. Just go into a town and set up your whole furniture warehouse and have people come in and just look at everything they can do with their homes.
If I were to own a franchise, I would definitely go with Midtown Comics in New York City. It's one of my favorite comic book stores. I think their model is perfect. Unfortunately, it's a privatized company, and I don't see that happening anytime in the future. So let's go over some basic information about franchises. The first franchise can be dated back to the Middle Ages. In 1791, Benjamin Franklin attempted to franchise out his printing press company in South Carolina. By 1851 was the birth of the franchise concept in American business. The Singer Sewing Machine Company, founded by Isaac Merrick Singer, offered control to the owner, operators in exchange for a share in the profits. In 1898, General Motors sold their first auto manufacturing franchise in Detroit, Michigan. In 1901, Coca-Cola first bottling plant was franchised. The first restaurant was Dairy Queen. And in 1940, they went from 10 locations to 2,600 locations in the first 10 years in business. And finally, we get to McDonald's. In 1952, Richard McDonald franchised out his first location to Ray Kroc. By 1954, Ray Kroc expanded the franchise and making McDonald's one of the world's largest businesses. Before you decide to spend all your savings into owning a franchise, you must do your due diligence. It's essential to understand what a franchise is and how it differs from a chain or independent business. Owning a franchise does not work the same way as a business that comes from an original idea that you have or you have created. So why do people invest in franchise, you may be wondering, instead of creating their own business from scratch? Buying a franchise lets you skip over a lot of the steps in business development, like creating a business plan, which can take months to develop. Instead, you can start your own business with a proven model and product that is already familiar to your consumers, giving you a step forward. And the 5 different types of franchises you can invest in that each person should look at is job franchises. These franchises often require low investment and overhead, and these type of businesses can be done from your home. A product franchise, in this type of franchise, the franchise owner distributes the franchisor's products. Common examples are the automotive industry, machine, and soda companies like Coca-Cola and Pepsi. Then you have the business format franchise, the most common type of franchise. The franchisor gives the franchisee access to all their systems, including marketing, operations, and training. Examples are fast food industries like McDonald's, Hardee's, Pizza Hut, and business services. The next is investment franchise. These franchises require franchisees to invest their own capital. Common examples are hotels and large restaurant franchises. And then last but not least is the conversion franchise. This type of franchise is basically a business format franchising with an acquisition component. It involves the franchisor acquiring other businesses in their sector and converting them into franchise locations. When you take the next step, these are some of the questions you're going to need to ask before you start to invest in a franchise. Where will your franchise be located? What is the success rate of the existing franchise? What method is used to protect the franchisees? Is there a franchise owners association? Is there a franchise advisory council? Who owns the trademarks, service marks, and are they federally registered? Has the franchisor compiled with the FTC and state disclosure laws? Will the franchisor finance any of the cost? And last but not least, is the franchisor willing to negotiate the terms of the franchise? We will go over these questions and much more throughout this podcast. But now I'd like to introduce our guest, Lloyd Ortuoste. He was born and raised in New Jersey, where he graduated from Keene University. Back in 2014, him and his wife, Tricia, started their culinary journey and created Baonanas. With the help from his family and friends, they were able to take their now famous pudding recipe and create a thriving business that is now expanding and allowing others to join their franchise. For fun, Lloyd likes hiking, jiu-jitsu, tennis, hip-hop dance, and a retired member of the Mooks. Lloyd, welcome to Investors Coffee Shop. Could you please tell us about being a member of the Mooks and show us some of your legendary hip-hop dance moves before we get started?
Thanks so much for having me. I am hitting a dance move right now. Wish you could see it, but it's all good. I'm excited to be here. And dance was actually one of my first passions before I found entrepreneurship. And I'm really excited to talk about that today.
Would you say dance helped you out in your entrepreneurship?
Oh, for sure. I think that when it comes down to like creativity and expression, that is marketing, that is branding. And I think dance is a way to express oneself. Was one of the first ways I was able to practice doing that.
What was the reason you and your wife chose the food industry, and how did you get started?
It's funny because I really feel like the food industry chose us. When we first started Baonanas back in 2014, it was just a hashtag on Instagram to raise money to fix our car. At the time, I was in school studying to be an occupational therapist to obviously become a lawyer. This little fundraiser accidentally became a side hustle, serendipitously became a business. It's now the thing I love.
So you decided to create a business. What made you want to create a franchise business?
After 9 years or 8 years of doing what we do, right now, Baonanas, we have corporate and wedding catering. We wholesale to cafes, restaurants, coffee shops, 2 brick and mortars that we own and operate, all while bootstrapping our way to where we are today. I'm a little tired because I'm running everything by myself. My wife is a full-time attorney now. What I've learned is what I'm really passionate for is for coaching, mentoring other entrepreneurs from making the same mistakes that I've made in the last 9 years. One of my biggest mentors, his name is Desi from Sweetberry Bowls. He runs successful franchise operation with around, I believe, 10 franchises. And
you decided to make this a franchise business. What would you say your timeline was to set that up? How long did it take you?
after we figured out that we wanted to franchise, luckily we were referred to what's called a franchise development group. It's a team of specialists, attorneys, company manual developers that essentially took our company manual, because I've always been a believer since day one that we need to have systems, we need to have SOPs, all this fancy corporate stuff that you hear, except in our small business so that we can scale. They took our company manual, our systems, they tidied that up. The whole entire process was maybe around 2 to 3 months, because essentially we were going through every little thing from how we make the products to how we do guest service, tightening them up, making sure that it was worth the $30,000 investment of our franchise fee to ensure that the FTC can look at it and say, hey, we're not a predatory franchisor, because those are out there and those are scary.
Well, you mentioned the company that you mentor after. What does that company do that you respect a lot and you've learned from?
I think the first thing that my mentor Desi does is that he leads with empathy, and he leads with this mindset of really taking care of his team and taking care of his guests. And I think that's why he's been so successful in the last 4 years. With those values, they were able to open up locations all across the Eastern region, as well as some in the Midwest, like kind of like the Chicago area too. And with him, just like how he's been mentoring me the last 2-3 years, like I really attribute a lot of the reasons why we were able to survive a lot of our tough times, like the pandemic, general contractor scam that I'll get into later probably. I attribute a lot of that to his help. And yeah, he mentors them at least once a week to really help them troubleshoot anything red that they're running into. They operate as franchisees.
What's the big difference between a chain and a franchise and working with your franchise?
With a chain, oftentimes what the structure looks like is like if we're talking about something starting from the ground up, a mom and pop shop, they get a lot of success. They're like, hey, we're really successful with our first location. Let's open up another one. And so with that, they'll do some sort of round of investment, whether it's passive or managing members, right? Some sort of capital investment, and control can change from there, right? If investors that come in put a significant amount of capital and they're able to get more control than the founders, then guess what? They have more voting rights. They can change the values, or it might sound corny, but like the soul of the company, right? Like the spirit of the company. And that's where it can get tricky with growing through investment with shareholders and, developing chains across a state, town, nation, whatever it may be. Now, with a franchise, what you're buying into is you're buying into a turnkey business. You mentioned it earlier. The systems are figured out. It's a proven concept. And what you're getting with a franchise, especially with the Baonanas franchise, shameless plug here, is you're getting like a 200-page manual about how we do absolutely everything, how we interview, how do we develop our leaders, how do we promote, how do we take care of our guests, what are our marketing strategies, what are our financial strategies, what do we look for in a P&L, or what are our targets for cost of goods, cost of labor, so that at the end of the day, your profit margin sits around 20%, which in the restaurant is like pretty fantastic. You're saving yourself a lot of the headache, a lot of the trouble of figuring out entrepreneurship, because that journey has been done. It's been perfected, it's been systemized, and it's given to you along with one-on-one time with the co-founder, CEO. It's that mentorship that I think is the long-term investment that franchisees would get.
You mentioned earlier the FTC. So wanted to elaborate on that, what role they play, and in particular, you mentioned this predatory franchise. What is that? I've never heard that. And then what other roles does the FTC play in this process?
So the FTC essentially ensures that franchisors aren't taking advantage of their franchisees. There's been numerous examples in the past. Burger IM is a big one where they would charge whatever the franchise fee is. That I don't think was really the problem with them. But what they would do is they would bake into their franchise agreement that the franchisees would have to source all their supplies from the franchisor, right? So we're talking branded cups, branded spoons, branded whatever it is. And what predatory franchisors will do is they'll have a price list at the beginning when they sign the franchise agreement. After a few months, they're going to hike up the prices, right? They're going to start eating at the franchisee until they go out of business. The franchisor absorbs that location and then turns it into a corporate location. This was done with Quiznos as well. Quiznos had a lot of issues with that too. Same exact model, like Burger IM's whole all that drama, all that tea. You can find that online. It's pretty wild. It's like the CEO fled the country to go who knows where. Yeah, and it's sad. It's people that are investing not only their time but their hard-earned money. Many people, they take the leap doing a 9 to 5 to wanting to be their own boss, and then they're being taken advantage of. And so the FTC, they review our franchise agreement. They make sure that everything makes sense, that the franchisees are protected, the franchisors are protected too, and that it's not like a usurious operation that we're running. And there's things like the types of financial reporting that we can share with our franchisees, right? We can't project what they can do out of their location. We can't say, hey, guess what? You sign with us, you're going to make $1 billion out of this location, right? We can't say that. And there's reasons why. And the FTC ensures that whatever information we disclose to our franchisees when we let them know about the value of investing in a franchise, and not only the value financially, but also lifestyle wise, that it's all well within the realm of non predatory, fair, just, and reasonable.
Going back into kind of the franchise, I assume there's different owners associations. Are you a member of any of them, and what are they?
I am not yet, to be honest with you. I wish I knew, but that is something that my mentor has been telling me to be a part of. I know he does seminars all over the nation about that too, and it's something that I have to look more into.
What is the Franchise Advisory Council, and what role do they play?
Franchise Advisory Council, usually it's kind of like representing the franchisees to talk with the franchisor for in case they want certain changes to be made in the franchisor relationship.
And so, franchisee relationship. What what's the terms that can be negotiated? How do they go about that? What items are negotiable in a franchise?
As someone once said, everything's negotiable, right? But I think when it comes down to a franchise agreement, for sure there are some non-negotiable things. And so things that can be negotiated, franchise fee, typically it's pretty boilerplate. But if someone is like, hey, I want to own two or three of these in the next 3 years, and I want to lock in a multi-territory agreement, and that's when, like for example, Baonanas, our franchise fee is $30,000. And that's when I'm like, hey, okay, cool. So you want to buy the rights for 3 towns or 3 cities in New Jersey or New York City? Let's talk, because I, as a franchisor, would rather work with 1 or 2 people that each own 3 locations than like 6 different people, right? Because if they've proven, whether with their resume or with their experience or with how they actually perform as a franchisee, that hey, like they can really take a franchise and they could really see it succeed, then of course I would want to keep rewarding that instead of taking the risk of working with someone new, right? And so I'm not sure what else can be negotiated. Let's see what else is there. Royalties can be negotiated. So our royalties is 6% of gross sales for our franchisees. And same thing with the multi-territory discount. It would really depend on a lot of factors like how many franchises are they doing, how much sales are they doing. If they're struggling as a franchisee, am I really going to want to take royalties on that if they're not making a profit? Like these are things that as a franchisor, like, look, I'm not gonna continue to hurt my franchisee if they're struggling. And so all these things, there's structure in the franchise agreement. It can be negotiated at the beginning, but after that agreement is signed, it's a legally binding document. And so any type of breach by either the franchisor or franchisee, there are ramifications. And so being able to negotiate at the very beginning to make sure that both parties are happy, super, super important.
Lloyd, you brought up an interesting question I have now. So let's say you're franchising out and somebody buys Newark, New Jersey. You're in Jersey City. They can also buy out the other towns to prevent competition from coming in. Do they have to put a location in each one of those towns, or can they just buy out those towns and make sure there's no other locations being put there?
So right now, our territories are defined as a 3 mile radius from a site for a population of 100,000 people, whichever is less. And so in the franchising terms, let's pretend they buy the territory of Union, New Jersey. And then they're like, hey, I also want to buy Millburn, New Jersey too. Have a clause there that says, cool, like we're going to sell you the rights to Union, New Jersey. You have to at least lock in a site within, I believe it's 6 months. Lock in a location within 6 months, open it within 12 months. And if neither one of those things are done, where let's pretend secretly they were opening up like a bizarro Baonanas of like, and they just want to stop us from opening up in that town. After 12 months, if they don't open, we have the right to terminate their franchise agreement, keep their franchise fee of $30,000, and do whatever we want with that territory. And so it sounds crazy and ridiculous, but you never know. And so, same thing with that second territory. so that if they open up the Union one, and then if for some reason in that second territory they were taking forever to open it up, we do have the right to cancel that second territory and keep the fees. If for some reason maybe they're just struggling with the first one and they couldn't open the second one in 12 months, we also have the right to be like, hey, we understand you're struggling. We understand that you really want to open up that second location, but you can't right now. And we're not going to cancel the franchise agreement. There's a lot of nuance there, but that's why the agreement that's everything.
And can someone say, we're in the state of Virginia. So if I contacted you and say, you know what, forget just the counties like Arlington, Alexandria, or Jersey City, I want the whole state of Virginia. Could someone buy out the whole state of Virginia or DC or Maryland?
Well, I feel like there's a price tag for anything, right? Yeah.
That is true.
I mean, it would be a very complex agreement of breaking down like 3 mile radiuses and 100,000 person territories. If someone is that crazy about Baonanas, I will find a price tag for that and I will sell them those rights, you know?
Excellent. And then if you were to do a whole state, would you say the price increases dramatically, or do you charge by counties or per 100,000 people?
I would probably charge by the 100,000 person radius, right? Because I'm a big believer in the same strategy that Starbucks has, which is take over a neighborhood or a market, and although the stores kind of cannibalize each other, they're going to take up the market share of that county, that city, that neighborhood, etc. And if it were to come to something as big as a state, I would probably break it down. I'll start at the major cities first, really look at the population there, do the $30,000 franchise fee, 6% royalties there, and then slowly expand out. Because if we're talking about like a whole state, of course, there's a lot of dead areas, there's a lot of towns that, as a franchisor, I also am responsible for saying, hey, this site, this town, this city, we're not going to hit the numbers that you want to hit, right? Because my conversations always start with, what's your vision? Or what do you want to take home from this, both financially and lifestyle wise? Because if you say, hey, like, I want an $80,000 salary, I want to work 40 to 50 hours a week doing CEO, CMO, CFO stuff, I want to lead a team of passionate individuals, but I want to open up in this town. And I don't believe that this town could provide those financials. I'm not going to approve that site. It's all about reverse engineering from what our franchisees want to get out of it. Because the last thing that I want is that they invest in a vision or a dream that we cannot provide. It comes short of their expectations. They fail as a franchisee. And now any prospective franchisees that come up to us and say, hey, I want to buy a franchise. Can I see your record of franchises in your last 3 years? And I say, yeah, we opened up three, closed three. Would anyone really want to buy a franchise, right? And again, another thing, this is disclosed in the franchise agreement so that our franchisees are knowledgeable about how are we as franchisors. So a lot of information there, Brian. Really good question.
Does the demographics play a big role? So if you go to a rural town, which is probably very little competition, but may not have the types of people that live there, does that make a difference when you approve a franchise?
Yeah, because for Baonanas, we are a multi-operational company out of one location. We can do catering, we can do pickups, deliveries, wholesale, and that all begins with what type of demographic of this city, of this town. So we look at age, we look at median income, right? We try to figure out based off of our two locations and why they are successful, how can those variables help us to decide how successful our future franchisees can be? Because if there's no one in this town and there's no other concepts or no other restaurants or cafes that we believe we would share a customer base with, then all the signs are pointing to, hey, this is maybe not the town of the city for us.
You talked about the $30,000 initial fee. What are the other types of investments for someone to start a franchise like Baonanas?
So after the franchise fee of $30,000, we hit the ground running. And what that means is by that point, I would have advised to already shortlist a few sites. I would have investigated, fancy word here, investigated, like, or dramatic word, I guess you can say. I would have already investigated what is their financial plan for doing the build out, the construction, um, the all the startup costs, like the initial inventory purchasing, which can range depending on how big the site is and where it is and how much construction and materials cost. It can range anywhere from 70,000 to 150,000. And what we've learned with Baonanas is we open up a small square footage in a highly populated area. That is one way that we can keep that startup cost pretty minimal and really see those returns on that investment essentially happen a lot quicker than somewhere with like a bigger foot traffic, or I'm sorry, a bigger square footage or foot traffic. Other than the 30% franchise fee, there's a 6% royalties of gross sales, as well as a 2% nationwide marketing contribution. Now, this is pretty standard for any franchises where every franchisee contributes to the overall marketing of the brand. These funds that come in as a 2% of gross, they need to be put into a separate marketing bank account by the franchisor because every year franchisors get audited. And if a single penny of this marketing, of this nationwide marketing contribution spent on anything else, like a partner distribution, literally anything, and guess what? Franchisor gets fined by the FTC because we charged a franchisee this as a marketing budget, as a marketing contribution, and we're using it for something else. And let's see, in terms of other investments, I mean, the coaching and the mentorship that's something that's part of the 6% royalties, and that's part of the franchise agreement. But if they wanted the franchisor to send a specialist to retrain the entire company, let's pretend that a franchisee is really struggling and they really need one-on-one hands-on coaching, where let's pretend they're in Chicago, I'm in Jersey, I got to fly out there, I got to do in-person coaching, then those have fees as well. And so, yeah, like those are really the only other fees that franchisees can really see happening from the franchisor.
Let's say I come in and I have enough to invest in this, but I have no experience and no training, and I don't even have a location. Do you help with that process? I know you mentioned training for stores that need the assistance, but how do you handle a situation like that? Can someone literally go to you right now and say, I have $500,000, I want to open a Baonanas, tell me where to go, train my people, tell me my timeline, and tell me what kind of experience I might need before we actually get this opened?
So it sounds like they have the capital, but they need the training, they need the experience, they need the mentorship, right? The first thing is figuring out, again, what is it that do they want out of this? Do they want to work in there, or do they want to put a general manager in place, right? Because for many folks that inquire about our franchising, they want to invest in this, put the right people in the right roles, and have it be pretty much passive income for them. And after figuring that out, let's pretend that their goal is like, yo, I don't want to work in it. I want a GM. Then from there, it's about figuring out what they want their return to be. Because a GM, that's a salary, right? That we got to bake into the financial spreadsheet, the budget for this. And then we got to talk about how much gross sales do we want to have. And in this part of the conversation, I can only contribute so much because I can't influence based on FTC regulations. Again, like I can't say, hey, open up here, you're going to make 500,000. I can say, hey, we do 500,000 out of this location. It's really similar to this town. Go and do the financial projections yourself. You can provide the templates for that, but we can't guide anywhere further than that. Now, after they find the site and they shortlist that and we say, hey, that looks like a really good site, we let them know. It comes with 44 hours of classroom training. And so what that means is that After paying the franchise fee, after negotiating with the site for the lease, if we got to negotiate, I'll help the negotiation with the lease too. I'll review the leases, give them my advice, my experience over there as well. And as that's going on, we're going to have class. So what that means is we're going to talk about operations. We're going to talk about marketing. We're going to talk about finance. I'm going to educate them on our organizational chart as a company and how we run a smooth operation and how all the operations departments work together to hit our financial goals. We're walking through our, again, 100 to 200 page company manual to teach them all of this so that they can build a proper structure, build a proper company, build it in a way that's in line with their goals and their vision. After the classroom training comes the on the job training. If they're going to hire a general manager, I would help them in getting someone that I believe would be successful in running this store and operating it. I'll teach them on how to make the actual product. We are franchising the kitchen aspect as well. After essentially, I'm holding their hand every step of the way during the build out, during the construction, up until the opening day. Then after opening day, once a week, you have a direct line with me. We'll reserve time to troubleshoot any problems that they might have. Make sure that they feel good about the company that they're running and that the numbers that they're hitting too.
Lloyd, so the cost to start everything up and to pay you the $30,000 to do that, what about for the people who don't have the $30,000 saved up? Is there a system in place to help people who may not have that much startup capital?
Unfortunately, right now, no. And the reason why is because with the 30,000 franchise fee, other than that, there's background checks that you have to go into place, right? Like our requirements is they need to have a net worth of at least the build out of their location. They need to have a credit score of at least 670. For me, if that 30,000, if whether it's through investment, loan, we don't have that at the beginning, then it's hard for me as a franchisor. How can we own a franchise if we can't come up with that initial 30,000? Now, when it comes down to the actual build out of the store, because after that 30,000 comes the build out of the location, which I mentioned can be around 70,000 to 150, depending on they're trying to open up like the Apple store, dessert shops in a 1,500 square foot space, or if they're just trying to open up like a small walk-in at the mall or the downtown area of a town. That's where some sort of a loan or forms of capital investment that they don't have to have liquid would be acceptable for us. And learning their financial strategy of how they plan on starting up this business is also my job as a franchisor. The last thing I want is someone puts their life savings into this, money that they really couldn't, or money that they're like gambling, I guess you can say. That never feels good to me as a franchisor, because it's a business at the end of the day, and there's risk in business. If folks take too big of a risk on this, to me, it just doesn't sit well. If that makes sense, because yeah, I don't know, I care. Like, and I've been through some rough times in a business in the last 9 years, and so a lot of things to think about for me when choosing a franchisee. And
What's the timeline? We agree with everything I pay you. How long does it take on average for me to set up the franchise? And then when investing in this franchise, what type of insurance is going to be required to get this thing going?
a location can open up in as soon as 3 months, but on average, it's around 6 to 9 months after signing the franchise fee. Because after the franchise fee comes finding the locations, negotiating the lease, doing the construction, and then comes the opening week. And depending on how smooth the project goes, depending on the site, all those variables kind of lead up to that. So insurance, so general liability insurance, business insurance, workers' compensation, standard restaurant insurance policies that we would need as a franchisee.
And the field staff, how do they help me as a franchisee build my business? And do you supply the field staff, or is this something I have to search out on my own?
So for the field staff, so My help goes as far as the general manager. When it comes down to actually finding like our front of house staff, the back of house staff, uh, we have procedures, we have guidelines of how to set up an application form, how to interview, what to look for in candidates, and how to not have turnover be so high. And if for some reason the franchisee is running into problems and they keep hiring the wrong people, or people keep quitting, or whatever it might be, um, they can ask me for help, and I can provide any advisement. But in terms of being hands on with that process, it's really just the general manager. And then when it comes down to folks for the actual build out, like my network is the network of our franchisees. When it comes down to the suppliers of ingredients, the distributors of packaging, all of that, of course, we'll set up our franchisees with. When it comes down to contractors, plumbers, etc., we have a Rolodex of fantastic folks that we can always provide for our franchisees in case they do need that as well.
And what is the franchise consultant, and how do they help with the business?
The franchise consultant that we work with, they're the franchise development group based in Albany, New York. And with them, they assisted us with making our franchise documents, the FDD, which is called the franchise disclosure document, which is it's the initial, essentially the agreement between the franchisee and the franchisor. That's the only thing that we can disclose to our franchisees. And they work with a legal team to ensure that we're compliant with the FTC, and that because at the end of the day, like I'm pitching to the franchisees as much as they're pitching. So they help me coach. They help coach me with how to pitch. They help me put together a slideshow and help communicate the important details. They also assist in after the franchisee gets started of creating a checklist of from the franchise agreement to opening day. What is everything that I have to do as a franchisor? What is everything that our franchisees have to do? Just like how I am a lifetime mentor of our franchisees, they're a lifetime mentor to me to be a successful franchisor. And yeah, they make sure that we're compliant with any type of tax stuff, law stuff, because again, franchising is a heavily regulated operation. And if I don't mind my P's and Q's, the FTC is going to go after me, and nobody wants that, right?
Yeah, exactly. Looks like a lot of structure, a lot of organization. There's a whole playbook for investing in opening a franchise. But what mistakes do people make when they're investing?
I think that if they don't do their homework on the franchisor, if they don't do the homework on founders, on the company, on the values, and they don't get to actually know the franchisor, then that's when you can run into some mistakes. Like for me, like I extensively want to get to know my franchisees on a personal basis because look, like, they say, oh, it's not personal, it's business, but business is personal. And if the values that you share don't match up with your franchisor, it's not really going to work out. When you look at their financials, you need to really ask them, hey, like, how did you hit these numbers? What is your typical cost of goods, cost of labor? In the franchise disclosure document, typically there's only the sales performance because the FTC they don't like when companies share their expenses portion because everyone's going to have different rent. Everyone's going to have different variable costs. In most FDDs, you'll only find the sales performance. And unless you ask the franchisor more information about what is your average cost of goods, what's your average cost of labor, like what percentage is your rent to gross sales, the things that make or break a restaurant business, which is an industry where the profit margins are already on average between 10 to 15%. And if you don't know that information, you shouldn't be signing a franchise fee or a franchise agreement. And I think the biggest thing is really understanding what you are getting into. Again, lifestyle wise, franchise wise, because you're essentially signing up to be an entrepreneur. Entrepreneurship is not an easy road. There's a lot of ups, a lot of downs. I think it's the most rewarding thing, the most fulfilling thing for me. but also sometimes it's hard. And if you don't have the skill, the perseverance to get through adversity, to problem solve on a high level, then I don't think entrepreneurship or owning a franchise is for you.
Yeah, that makes sense. Definitely. And speaking to that skill and perseverance, you someone does their homework and now they're in it. What should they be aware of that they might not think about? And I really want to call back to you mentioned this contractor issue you had, but and feel free to elaborate on that too, but what other things, what are the unknowns that people who have done their homework and prepared for should be prepared for?
I mean, I think that's a big one of only working with people that you have a personal referral with when it comes down to big projects. Yeah, let's start there. And to talk a little bit about the general contractor scam that my wife and I were unfortunately victim of when we built our flagship store back in 2019. We, along with around a dozen other folks, hired a general contractor. Turns out this guy was like a high level con man. He deserves his own Netflix show because he was doing like a really high level operation. And we were around 40K, 50K in the hole because he would do things, him and his company would do things on the project, would do it haphazardly just to meet a milestone on the payments, would delay the whole entire construction project just to keep buying time. And this is our first time. We were like 26, 27. We've never done a construction project before. We didn't really have the guidance of someone a lot more experienced than we were for this job. And unfortunately, we got burned, but we learned a lot through that process. When it comes down to the construction project, number one, I'm of course going to be heavily involved, making sure that they know their contractors, they're reputable, whoever's installing the plumbing or electrical, that they're reputable, and making sure that they don't get burned there. And then when it comes down to, honestly, I think one of the biggest things that a lot of business owners run into the trouble of, and we did this too, is growing in a way that their growth but doesn't add to the profit. What I mean by that is because Baonanas, because we have a lot of ventures, wholesale, catering, etc. For a long time, I was like, hey, so long as the gross goes up, I'm good. Let's keep growing, let's keep doing it. And then next thing I know, because I wasn't as obsessed about the labor and the cost of goods, I'm finding that our profit margin percentage is going way less. I'm finding myself feeling burnt out and spread thin. I'm actually kind of going through that right now in terms of being spread thin because we've grown pretty significantly in the last few months, guiding our franchisees that, hey, before we choose to grow, we need to financially project not only the sales, but also the expenses. We need to ask ourselves, are we why are we choosing to grow in this route? And what does that mean in a difference of operations, the difference of expenses, and most importantly, our profit margins and our bottom line? Because I've gone through the fire of growing too fast and growing for growth's sake instead of being very proactive about our strategic objective to grow, I'll be able to really help our franchisees avoid making those mistakes.
You mentioned the growth, and I think you've seen it, and you probably are more aware about it than we are. But there are those cases where there's a new business in town, and they have 12 locations all of a sudden, and then in 2 years, only one of them exists. And it's a very interesting story of is what happened there, and not focusing on the business value of growth and just growing for the sake of growing. So I think you bring up a really good point there.
If we, especially in food, where a lot of folks, they start off from scratch, like it's a passion of theirs, just like us. Like, I didn't go to business school. Like I learned from mentors, I learned from books. I learned from just studying up and reading up as much as I can in the industry. We got to remember at the end of the day, like, we're all starting businesses to try to take care of our families, to try to do things that we like to do. It might sound selfish. I think that has to be where we begin our thought process of, hey, if I'm going to grow, how does this help my family? How does it help me pay for the bills? And if the growth doesn't facilitate that, then it's growth, again, just for growth's sake. And that's what I hope to teach any of our franchisees.
You get the franchisees And I'm sure there are safeguards, but what are those safeguards to prevent the franchisee from changing the business format, if there's penalties involved, or if they decide, after a year to kind of get out of the franchise but create their own Baonanas variant?
Mm, yeah. So there's certainly safeguards there. So when I first started getting into learning about franchising, I thought that franchising would mean a loss of control, a loss of quality, um, and someone can take our brand and totally morph it into something else. Um, what I've come to learn actually is that you have more of a risk with that with corporate partnerships instead of franchising because of the operating agreement. Now, the operating agreement, if we go 50-50 with someone that invested in Baonanas to open up a location, we have equal voting rights. And so if they want to offer, let's say, hot dogs out of a Baonanas location, and we both own 50-50, and we disagree, then if there's clauses in the operating agreement that say, hey, if the two parties disagree, this is how you resolve it, then we follow that. But if there's no clause in there, then we have to figure out a way to mediate that situation. Now, with the franchise agreement, it's actually a lot more in terms of quality control, in terms of say in how the brand goes, it's heavily, heavily favored for the franchisor so that the recipes are protected, the branding is protected. And if there's any type of breach by the franchisee, where if I walk in one day and they're selling chili dogs, and I'm like, what is happening here, guys? Like, what is this? This doesn't make any sense. Then there's protocols in there where I have to send the franchisee a written warning. Breach happens again, and I can actually pursue a fine. If it happens a third time, I believe a third or a fourth time, then I can pursue to like essentially reabsorb that location. They forfeit their ownership of the franchise, all because they continuously breached the agreement. The big reason why I chose to go the franchising route because I've learned about the pros and cons of doing a corporate partnership. Certainly a lot more pros, but I think the biggest thing is the bandwidth of owning and operating a corporate location versus a franchise one. Ryan, like I want to live in Hawaii and run a franchising program out of there and travel wherever I want and be able to help our franchisees. So that's what I'm pursuing here.
There's a lot of different franchises out there for people to choose from. How do you differentiate yourself, and what makes a franchise just a fad versus a long-term business?
So with Baonanas, over the last 9 years, we've proven that there is a demand for a new dessert, something very different, very unique. This new take on banana pudding with over 41 different flavors, texture like a tiramisu, scooped like ice cream, something you can't find anywhere else. What people can like, what they need to try to learn about a franchise and its staying power is, I think, one, the history to see what is the demand looking like through time and where's the demand today and how can it grow. And then two, it's really figuring out their exit plan too. Because maybe for someone, it's, hey, I want to own and operate one franchise. I want to put a general manager in there to run it and open up two more so that it can be passive income for me. When it comes down to our franchise and why it's so different from the other options that might be out there, number one, when it comes down to actual back of house operations for a select few locations in New Jersey, we're actually going to take care of that because we have a production facility where we can make everything in bulk. We can scale it a lot easier than like an independently owned shop could. And so the cost of goods is going to be a lot less than if they were to make it on site. Now, it doesn't mean that they can't make it on site, but the big thing with Baonanas that makes it different is that the quality of the product is really in the technique that we use to make the product. The ingredients themselves are cost effective. They're very economical. Where the value comes is how we make the mousse light and fluffy, how we layer the vanilla wafers and the bananas and the other fresh fruits so that when they enjoy it, the texture is perfect. As the first mover in this artisanal banana pudding space, we are creating a corner of the market that our sales performance in the last 9 months kind of goes to show how successful it can be, how by being the first movers of a market can really dominate that market. There's no one else out there doing banana pudding like we're doing it. We're finding that people actually really like it.
It sounds delicious. I mean, when I come back to New York, I'm definitely going to stop by and have some. Well, if somebody does start a franchise with you and they start to fail or go out of business, how does this affect all the other franchisees and the investors in your business? Does it make your business look bad? Because sometimes it's like a run on the bank situation. When one fails, then they all start to fail. Is there a way to protect yourself and your franchisees from this?
Of course, if a franchise fails, then across the brand, it's not a good look, right? Because the first question that I would have as a franchisee is how are your other franchisees doing? What are their sales looking like? And these are things that are in the franchise disclosure document. You can see how many franchises we've opened and how many have closed. That's why I'm heavily invested in making sure that our franchisors are, our franchisees are successful. And when it comes down to the structure of how our businesses are built, Baonanas LLC, which my wife and I own majority of, we own our catering, our wholesale, and all the operations I've spoken about in the East Village. We actually opened that up with our partners at 7th Street Burger, super viral, super popular New York City burger chain that's been taking over Manhattan in the last few years. And Baonanas Franchising LLC is owned by my wife and I. Although these are three different businesses and with different entities and different investors in each one, the success of them all is what allows the brand power to continue to elevate through the years. I think the challenge that I have is ensuring that they're all being taken care of. Honestly, it's like having kids. I don't have any kids, but I can't neglect any one of these and see them suffer. And so that's why I'm really blessed and privileged. I have a fantastic team that allows us to really keep the tide rising so that all the ships continue to rise with that tide.
Makes sense. But what type of people would you recommend stay away from this franchise model? I'm sure there's lots of people that think this idea is great, but it's not really for them.
I think the people that should avoid a restaurant franchise is anyone that doesn't think they can get through the ups and downs of entrepreneurship. Even if this is something that someone wants to invest in, hire a general manager, try to make it as passive as possible. At the end of the day, if that general manager quits, if they leave, whatever it might be, the owner of the franchise needs to figure it out. Entrepreneurship is high level problem solving every single day, and owning a franchising is exactly that. I think something else people should avoid is if we're putting our life savings into this, if we are taking a complete gamble on this, and this is something that, like, hey, make or break, this is like everything, that this is not the type of risk that you should be taking. And so ensuring that you're properly taken care of financially before you do take on a business venture, whether it's franchising or starting your own business, I would advise against that because, again, business is risky. Yes, there's high rewards, but there's higher consequences too if things weren't to go down. And I think the last thing I would probably say is that anyone that cannot follow procedures, cannot follow systems, anyone that's not coachable, anyone that's closed minded, anyone that's not passionate for actually providing service, serving happiness to guests and to people. This is not the job for you. This is not the industry. It is a service industry for a reason. If those aren't your passions, then I'd probably say maybe look elsewhere for a way to grow your money.
All right, Lloyd. So right before we wrap this up, what is the main takeaway you would recommend for people who are interested in getting into a franchise? What's the number one advice you would give?
The number one advice I would give for anyone looking to open up a franchise, really sit down, write down the lifestyle that you want out of owning this franchise. Understand not only the lifestyle, but the financial return that you want to make on this franchise, because that investment that you make is significant and the ROI, both financially, emotionally, mentally. It can be 2, 3, 4, 5x of that. It can be a lot of times it's not something you can really quantify, right? Understanding this first step of the process and understanding why you're even considering this in the first place and getting that on paper, staring at that and being like, this is my North Star. This is why I want to do this. This is what I want to get out of it. That should drive everything, your decision making of who you franchise with, of where you open up your store, of the type of marketing that you have, the financial goals that you have. That's everything. Because without that, then you're kind of just driving into the abyss, not really clear about why you're taking this step in the first place.
Excellent. I would like to thank Lloyd for speaking with us today. We've learned lots of valuable information on the franchise industry. Lloyd, what is the best way for people to reach out to you and to learn more about your company and investing in your franchise?
So you can check us out on Baonanas.com. That's spelled Baonanas, or on Instagram, TikTok, all that fun stuff.
You can also contact us on Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, and Instagram. Thank you for listening.
Thank you for listening.
If you enjoyed this episode, hit subscribe, like, and leave us a review.
Don't forget to follow us on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, and Twitter.
We will see you next time at Investors Coffee Shop.